where news comes first. This is ABC-7 Extra.
A sudden overnight complete closure of the airspace over El Paso and near Santa Teresa leads to a major confusion and concerns about what exactly was happening. And as the El Paso closure was lifted just as suddenly hours later, more issues raised about how decisions were being made and a lack of communication with local governments and agencies. As travelers scrambled to change and rearrange plans and flights even returned to normal, even more questions being raised about why the actions were taken. So what is the local response and efforts in the aftermath, and what happens now? Welcome to ABC-7 Extra Sunday. Good evening, everyone. I'm Andrew J. Polk. So to talk about all of what has gone on this week, we're now joined by Mayor Renard Johnson for the city of El Paso. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Andrew.
Very happy to have you on. So in the aftermath, as we are still breaking down and trying to find out more about what happened, one of the major questions we have is, when did you first get the call that the airport was shut down?
Yeah, so the evening before the airport was shut down, I got a call from our city manager, who then followed up with a text message saying that the airport was going to be shut down for 10 days. And that's how I first learned about it. And like many of you, we were asleep. We woke up the next morning to news that the airport is shut down, and that's what created the chaos and confusion.
So in that chaos and confusion and dealing with it, what were then some of your first calls or first reach out attempts to find out more?
Well, yeah, so the first thing you want to do is make sure that everyone in the city is safe. I wanted to reach out to the airport director. I wanted to reach out to our police department, fire departments, to make sure that everything was going safely in the city of El Paso, and to get further information on what was going on. Again, we were in the dark. We didn't know why our airport was shut down. So if you imagine you wake up and the first thing you hear is your airspace has been shut down, do you pack up your kids? Do you leave the city? What do you do at that point? And that's kind of what we were dealing with. There was a lot of chaos that day.
Yeah, a lot of things were running through people's minds, and that was essentially my next question for you, is what were your initial thoughts? But in terms of then beyond the what do I do as in a city leader, what was the questions about what might need to be mustered at that point?
Yeah, so what you want to do is, I've got to tell you, we reached out to, the Congresswoman reached out to us, the Major General Taylor at Fort Bliss reached out to the office and were giving us updates. So it was communication at that time. We were, it was full court press at that moment. We were trying to get answers, trying to figure out what was going on. And the Congresswoman office, again, they were in constant communication with us. I had several calls that morning with Major General Taylor at Fort Bliss to try to get a better understanding of what was going on. Because again, you don't want to wake up to information that your airspace is shut down. You don't know what's going on. So it does create some panic and chaos in your community.
Can you talk a little bit about what the decision process was behind the scenes as the city started putting out information? I personally saw that notice about the airport being shut down for those 10 days, I think a little bit after midnight there on then, Tuesday into Wednesday. And then a city statement came out a little bit after that. So what machinery was in motion at that point?
Yeah, so you're gathering with your city manager, your city attorney, your staff there at the city, to get information to make sure that what we put out is accurate, the best that we could put out. And I can tell you, even today, we have had no communication with the FAA or anyone to let us know what truly happened. So we're putting together the best information that we had at the time to get that out to the community. Because again, we didn't know either. So we were responding to the very little information that we had at that time.
Again, initially as this came down, it was a 10-day ground stop, airspace closure, nothing supposed to be flying in that roughly 10-mile radius there of El Paso International. What kind of steps, as that was still in place, was being considered about what was needed to continue things happening in El Paso? Yeah,
so the Congresswoman's office was working to get the temporary flight restrictions lifted so we can get back open to business here at El Paso International Airport. And keep in mind, Andrew, that 9/11, our airport only closed for 2 days. So this incursion of a drone or a balloon that's been reported on other stations shut down our airspace for 10 days. That would be equivalent to you shutting down Houston or Dallas or even New York's airspace for 10 days. It cripples your community. It cripples your medical evacuations that were occurring. It completely grounded our medvac system here at the fire department. So it was a very, very big deal for the city of El Paso.
We've heard some of the sound that has come out about the air traffic control communications for that, basically the last flight that came in. What was actually communicated? How was the city, I mean, the airport and departments actually notified about how this closure was being put in place?
Yeah, so very similar to the way you found out. You know, we found out the same way. Again, I got a call and got a text from the city manager. So that's how I found out. I didn't get any formal communication saying, you know, at this moment, we're going to shut your airport down for 10 days. I think, you know, it's good to say, too, that, you know, we have had other drone incursions come from the southern border, probably north, for many, many years, but it's never shut down the airport in any magnitude like it did this time.
So in that, again, 10-day consideration as initially came in, and others that I believe are still in place as we are speaking right now in other parts of our area, what kind of concerns do you have about, again, what that may mean for the security of our region? That is a primary concern that a lot of people were then wondering, kind of like you expressed, about what do I do personally, what do I need to do to keep myself and my family safe? Yeah,
so, and again, I want to make sure that the community knows we are a very, very safe city. And, you know, we are surrounded by our wonderful military installation there at Fort Bliss. We have White Sands. And El Paso will remain a very safe city. The drone incursions have probably been going on for many years, and they've been taking care of it. And we are for national defense. And I want everyone to know we want to keep our community safe. That is first and foremost. National defense, and also at the local level, we want to do that as well. So it's important to know that, you know, working with our community partners, working with our state and federal government partners, we're going to continue to make sure that El Paso is safe.
Even as the initial response to the airspace closure unfolded overnight, the situation changed as the FAA reopened it that morning. The city's response and shift at that point coming up. You're watching ABC-7 Extra. Welcome back to ABC-7 Extra. I'm Andrew J. Polk, continuing our conversation with El Paso Mayor Nard Johnson about the city's response to the airspace closure as the situation continued to change that morning. As this was then lifted, how was that communicated, that that was actually going to be put in place? And then what essentially were the follow-up steps that you all were needing to take to deal with that? Because it's not just well, flights can start again now. There was then a lot of other issues that compounded.
Yeah, so we heard from the Congresswoman's office that this was going to be lifted. And again, starting the National Airways System, which they call the NAS system, it takes a while. You know, it's not like you can turn the switch on and all the planes can continue to start flying again. So our airport director was very actively involved. There were people at that moment trying to figure out what do we need to do to get the system started again. So starting the National Airways systems from El Paso and getting the planes to be able to fly back out. But what this created is, you know, the confusion of the passengers that were in the airport. You know, a lot of them were told we were closed for 10 days. They were renting cars. They were trying to drive to Albuquerque, to Phoenix, and other areas to get out of El Paso. So a lot of them did leave. And that costs them money, you know. So El Paso doesn't want to be known for having our airport shut down. And again, we're the 6th largest city in the state of Texas, number 22 in the United States. And it's very, very important that our airport stays open.
What kind of impacts? You talked a little bit about this. Have you found out any more about impacts to, say, you know, critical services, both in terms of medical, not even just transport, but also supplies that may have been coming in?
Yeah, so yeah, again, you know, I talked to one of the hospital systems here that morning, and you know, there's supplies that they receive, you know, on a daily basis that come in through our airlines. And there's a number of businesses that were affected. You know, Federal Express was shut down. There were no flights coming in and out of the city of El Paso, and that was going to be told for us for 10 days. So there was a number of impacts. You know, there was business meetings that were canceled. We can't even quantify the amount of disruption that this has caused for the city of El Paso.
Going back a little bit about how this unfolded, I mean, the information that was getting received and that, like you mentioned, the city manager had about how that ground stop and airspace restriction was going into place. What happened in like the immediate hours before that, between roughly, say, 9 p.m. and then midnight, then on Tuesday, in terms of what was going on within the city?
Yeah, so the behind the scenes would have been a number of calls with the city manager, myself, and other stakeholders. The Congresswoman was reaching out at that time, and she was on DC time, so she was up and working. Major General Taylor was up and working. And at that moment, we were trying to gather information on why we were having a temporary flight restriction placed over the city of El Paso. information was very limited at the time. So you try to gather data and information before we put that out to the public. And that's what we were doing. So a lot of calls, a lot of trying to figure out what was going on, because we knew that when our citizens were getting up the next morning that there was going to be confusion and chaos, because all you saw was the airspace was closed down and you don't know why. So that creates some anxiety in your community, and we wanted to make sure that we were messaging out that we were on top of it.
As it unfolded and as then it was removed, what kind of communication have you received to this point from any of the non-local partners? I mean, it sounds like you were working with, again, locally based operations and officials, but outside of our area, what communication have you received to this point now?
So to this point, we haven't received anything. Again, we've had no communication with the FAA on why the TFR was put in place and then lifted so quickly. That information I don't have today, but we are going to be sending a letter to the FAA to try to figure out what happened. And I think at the end of this, we need to know that we got to do better communication to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And that's the ultimate goal at the end of this, is to communicate with the FAA, to communicate with our partners to make sure that El Paso doesn't have to go through this.
Some of the responses that we've received, particularly on that point about the level of communication, is some saying that in a true emergency, the local officials don't need to be notified, that they just need to be able to respond. So in that vein of people saying, well, it wasn't really prerogative of El Paso to have a decision in this matter, what would you say to that kind of level of concern?
I would say that that is reckless and putting people's lives at risk. I would tell you that El Paso didn't choose to be on the national news. I will tell you that people needed surgeries that day. There may have been people flying out to MD Anderson or Houston Methodist Hospital that day to get surgeries. So to say that we didn't need to be notified that the airport was going to be closed, I think that's irresponsible. So I don't know who would say that, but it is certainly irresponsible. El Paso didn't wake up saying we wanted to be, on the national news. And this is not how we want to be known. Again, we're a very large city. And you can't go and shut down Houston, Dallas, Phoenix, or any of the other communities and shut down their airspace. We have always had incursions with drones come through the community, but at the very least, I think we can all agree you should have told our Emergency Operations Center, because you have to prepare. You have people coming into El Paso. You have passengers here. So for anyone to think that you don't have to notify or communicate to the citizens of El Paso, I think is irresponsible.
Not exactly an ideal situation, but if you had an ability to dictate how this response would have happened or should happen again in the future, how should this have unfolded in your mind?
I think what should have happened is certainly through our federal channels, they could have reached out to the city and say, hey, look, we know that there's a known threat to the community. We're going to have to shut down the airspace for a number of hours. And that way we could communicate and be ready when we get the number of calls that we were receiving that the airspace was shut down. I think, Andrew, it's important to point out that we sit in the middle of two very large military installations that do a number of testing on a daily basis. And oftentimes they are shutting down roads going I-70 towards Las Cruces. So that gets shut down. But also when Air Force One comes through, we shut down our airspace for a number of hours. We have never, ever shut down the airspace in the way, this was unprecedented. And again, 9/11, we were shut down for 2 days. So why were we going to be shut down for 10 days for one drone? We cannot have that happen again here in the community of El Paso.
Even as the immediate concerns subsided, there remain questions about what exactly happened. The mayor's response to those concerns and what should happen going forward after the break. You're watching ABC-7 Extra. Welcome back to ABC-7 Extra. I'm Andrew J. Polk, still speaking with El Paso Mayor Renard Johnson about what happens next in the aftermath of the El Paso airspace closure. So to the situation and the understanding we have at this point as we are speaking right now is that there was some kind of test being planned for a drone interdiction system. It is being reported by some of our national news reporters and partners of being maybe a laser-based system, some kind of directed energy, and that there actually was a use of the system in our area. Based on what is coming out from, again, sources that are not able to speak officially, what are your concerns about what happened there and wanting to know more at this point?
Yeah, so I mean, I'd be speculating because, again, that is being reported by some sources. I have no idea to this date if there was a laser being shot. I've heard balloons being shot at. So we still don't know to date, but what I can tell you is we got to make sure we communicate better. If that is the case and there was going to be an exercise, we just have to communicate to the city. You have almost 800,000 people in the city of El Paso that woke up saying their airspace was shut down. That creates panic in a community. And if we can communicate better, I think we're going to be a lot better as a whole region that we can get through this the next time.
Had the city been notified earlier, what steps would you have taken, again, assuming that a communication was where you would want it to be, what steps would the city have taken to have prepared for, as initially put in place, a full 10-day shutdown?
I think we would have probably started with our police department, alerting them to say, hey, we're going to be shutting down the airspace, and there may be some calls come in about what that means. You know, is there an active war here in El Paso? What's going on? Because no one really knew what was happening at that time. So I think at the very least, we should have told our police department. We should have let our emergency operations center know that we were going to be doing a test, because we do have that here in the city of El Paso. We are a very sophisticated city, and this isn't the first time we've activated our EOC and things like that. Unfortunately, we had August 3rd, and they've activated it then. We activated it when we had the water break. So I think you've got to communicate, and you got to over communicate, because to create fear in a community is something that is unnecessary and we should not be doing.
It sounds, at least at this initial point, that there is issues about communication, not even just between local and federal partners, but also between federal partners themselves and active in our area. Any concerns you would want to share, or perspective you want to share with them about how this kind of needs to work for the city of El Paso and its people?
I think, you know, we certainly had some really good communication between the Congresswoman Escobar's office, Major General Taylor at Fort Bliss. We had some excellent communication. I think where some of the communication breakdown was on the FAA side. And if we would have known that we were going to be shutting that down, some formal notice to say, hey, this is going to be shut down, and these are the reasons why, we could have better prepared for this, what happened with the shutdown.
You've mentioned that the communication with Congresswoman Escobar. We've talked with other members of our local and federal delegations here, including with Southern New Mexico and with the Senate representation for Texas out here. There have been everything from calls to investigations and even classified briefings on this. At that level, what would you like to see kind of coming out of this?
I think the federal folks will certainly get that figured out, and they'll have their investigations or whatever they need to do. But what I'm asking for on the local level is just to let us know. Again, we are for national defense. We want to make sure that our area is safe. That is first and foremost. But also locally, we want to make sure that we protect the residents here in El Paso. And we got to communicate, and that's where we come from. That's the angle that we're at it. But on the federal level, they'll work that out. They'll have their hearings, and they'll do what they need to do. But make sure you communicate with the municipality that you're going to be doing this testing.
Was there any consideration of use, or even drafts may be made up, of using the El Paso emergency communication system, some things that were used after, say, the August 3rd attacks, when there was a massive information sent out like directly to cell phones of people in El Paso? No,
none of that, because there was no communication, and that could have been an option. I think that's a good point. You know, if we knew that there was going to be a test, or we knew that they were going to shut down the airport at that moment, maybe we could have went out with a broadcast, or we could ask our partners to help us communicate to the city that this is what's going on. But remember, this was happening at nighttime, 9, 11 o'clock at night. So most people are asleep, and then you wake up and you turn on the news and you see breaking news that the airport shut down. That's what created some of the chaos.
Beyond the immediate aftermath that we're still sorting through at this moment, what do you feel that this reveals about maybe the people of El Paso, or want people to know about El Paso in the aftermath of this? You mentioned El Paso is a safe city, but I mean, people may have different thoughts about it, having seen these headlines about our region.
Yeah, and again, I want everyone to know that, we want you to come to our beautiful city. We want you to enjoy El Paso. This is not representative of who we are. Again, we had a blip on the radar. Our airport was closed for almost 7 hours. We made the national news. We didn't wake up wanting to make the national news. And again, come enjoy our beautiful city. Come enjoy our safe city. We have a region that's made up of about 2.7 million people, wonderful people. El Paso is one of America's friendliest city. I invite people that are here to enjoy that. I was speaking this morning to a group that's here from out of town. They're having a great time in our community. So I think people won't hold this against us, and they wouldn't want this to happen in their neighborhoods as well. I think more people are going to continue to come to El Paso. They're going to continue to enjoy our weather, our people, our food, our culture. So I think it was just a blip on the radar, and we'll get through it.
In terms of, again, just the city's operations at this point, any lessons learned, any changes, anything that you might want to implement coming out of a situation like this that you would want to, at least from what you can control, maybe work better next time?
Yeah, I think what we'll do, and we've done this well at the city, is we'll do a postmortem. We'll go in and look at what we can do better. How can we communicate better within ourselves, within our group, the things that we can control. But when something's outside your control like this, it makes it very difficult. But we'll have to make sure that we have our channels of communication open with the FAA, open with our congressional folks, open with Fort Bliss, our military installations, and we'll make sure that we're communicating. And I think ultimately that's the end goal of this, is to make sure that we're all communicating so we don't create panic or fear in the community.
Again, guests right now have been Mayor Renard Johnson. Thank you very much for speaking to us in the aftermath and looking at the next steps of this issue surrounding El Paso.
Thank you, Andrew.
We have complete coverage of all the issues surrounding the airspace closure, including our investigation into the anti-drone technology that has been previously tested in our region. Find it all right now on KVIA.com. Thank you for joining us. I'm Andrew J. Polk. Stay safe out there. Look twice for motorcycles when out on the road, and have a great evening and week ahead. I'll see you next Sunday night.